And in an age and time of sound bites, we think that it is best to be able to hear from the candidates themselves in their own voices, and to be able to hear them give a clear and articulate answer to questions that are being posed. And we're very pleased that each of these questions actually come from William Carey University students. So these are the kinds of things that our students want to know about from our candidates. As a part of this process, in sending out the questions to the students, we wanted our students to be informed about what the Secretary of State of Mississippi does, which is different than the federal Secretary of State and is different from the responsibilities in other states as well. And so we helped our students to understand a little bit about that. But we also, in just a moment, will have one of our students, Jacoby Shipman, who will actually give a brief description of what the Secretary of State does. And I will have to admit that I learned about what the Secretary of State does, and it is actually much more extensive, and the responsibilities are much broader than I had realized. And so a part of an informed electorate is knowing not only the candidates, but also knowing the offices for which they are running. We believe that this actually helps our students to be better critical thinkers, and not only just preparing them for one day when they're going to vote, but they're voters, and that we want them to be informed in this election. And so we want to encourage our students to be engaged, to participate, and to vote in elections. And this is a great way to do this. We're very appreciative of our candidates, Johnny Dupree and Michael Watson, for being here and for sharing with us and being able to inform us about themselves and about the office. We're also very appreciative of our co-hosts. And so we have Russ Nobile and Jane Minardi, who is from the Mississippi Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society, are co-hosting with us. Also, the Mississippi Gulf Coast Business Council, and Edward Ashley will be introducing the moderator in just a moment. And then after I pray for our invocation, Ms. Jacoby Shipman will come and describe the responsibilities of the Secretary of State. And I want to then remind you that after our forum, that we will have a reception immediately following, and it is going to be in our recital hall. So as you came in, you'll go just right outside through the lobby, and immediately as you go outside to the right. And so you were invited to come to the reception to be able to mill around and to be able to fellowship. So let us pray, and then Jacoby Shipman will come and speak to us. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for these men, for their leadership, what all that they have done and accomplished, and the ways that they have benefited our communities and state thus far. God, I thank you for both of these men who are both servants and leaders. God, I thank you that they desire to serve our state in additional ways. God, I thank you for this university and the opportunity to inform our students and our broader public. God, what a privilege it is to have our system, and a privilege it is to be able to participate in our system. We ask these things in your name. Amen. Amen.
Thank you. As Dr. Hummel said, my name is Jacoby Shipman. I am your former Miss William Carey. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. Okay. So, established in 1817, the Office of the Secretary of State has oversight over a variety of functions and responsibilities. The office is composed of these 8 divisions. The first one is Business Services. Business Services handles filings related to business formation and regulation, and also issues notary commissions and administers trademark, service mark, and nonprofit laws. The second division is the Charities Division, which registers charitable organizations and professional fundraisers operating in the state of Mississippi. and also responds to complaints and investigations related to charity fraud. The third division is Education and Publications. Education and Publications produces and distributes publications such as the Blue Book, the Official and Statistical Register, and also coordinates Promote the Vote. The fourth is the Elections Division, which administers the State Election Code, trains elections commissioners, and enforces campaign finance and lobbying requirements. The fifth division is Policy and Research. Policy and Research looks for new ways to streamline services and develop potential legislation. The sixth division is the Public Lands Division, which administers and supervises state-owned lands and also keeps an inventory of agency-held lands. The seventh division is Regulation and Enforcement. Regulation and Enforcement regulates pre-need and perpetual care providers, enforces scrap metal laws, and oversees administrative procedures for the Mississippi state government. The last division is the Securities Division, which administers Mississippi's uniform securities laws and investigates securities frauds, as well as registers state investment advisors and broker-dealer firms and representatives. So again, these are your 8 divisions for the Office of the Secretary of State.
Good evening.
Hello.
I'm Jane Maynardi, a member of the leadership team of the Mississippi Gulf Coast Lawyers Chapter of the Federalist Society. We are privileged to co-host tonight's candidate forum with William Carey and the Gulf Coast Business Council. We especially appreciate William Carey's commitment to the civic education, not just of its students, but of the larger voting community. The Federalist Society is a not-for-profit, nonpartisan 501c3 organization that has earned its reputation of providing forums for fair, open, and civil discussion about individual freedoms, the role of courts in interpreting the law, and the principles of limited government and separation of powers. We do not and will not endorse candidates, take policy positions, or lobby for particular legislation. Whether you're attending tonight's event in person or watching a recording, you're part of a long-standing American tradition in which candidates debate ideas and submit working principles to the collective judgment and wisdom of the voters. I want to thank tonight's candidates for being here. Through their participation in this forum, they are contributing to the goal of fair and open elections and educated voters, all of which are essential to a successful democratic republic. Thanks also to Brad Kesey for agreeing to moderate tonight's forum, and to Ashley Edwards with the Gulf Coast Business Council for its help with this event. We have enjoyed working with them, and we appreciate their participation in tonight's forum. I am going to be followed by Ashley Edwards, the Executive Director of the Gulf Coast Business Council, for his opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Jane, and good afternoon to all of you. I want to especially thank William Carey University for providing us with this wonderful facility for the debate this afternoon. Thankfully, it's indoors, and so we won't have to worry with the 90th straight day of August that we're still having in October outside. But thank you all for showing up today. As Jane mentioned, I represent the Gulf Coast Business Council. We are the leading voice for economic sustainability in Mississippi's coastal region, and we're very proud to be a part of the forum this afternoon as we continue this dialogue about important public policies that will shape our state into the future. Thank you to both of the candidates, Mayor Dupree and Senator Michael Watson, for being here. And it's my honor this afternoon to introduce a fellow Coastian and our moderator for this afternoon's forum, Brad Kesey, who is the news director for WLX Television based in Gulfport. Brad, I'll turn it over to you.
Ashley, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. We appreciate you being here. It's hard to believe that we're 4 weeks and 5 days away now from an election cycle that seems like it's gone on forever. The one race you haven't heard that much about, if you want to know the truth, is this Secretary of State race. We've heard a lot on television about the governor's race. We're hearing now about the lieutenant governor candidates. We're going to hear more in the next couple of weeks about the attorney general race. This is the race that people don't know about. And think about this. In the great state of Mississippi, statewide elected leaders are often north of Hattiesburg. The Secretary of State is going to be somebody who is from Hattiesburg south.
Yep.
South Mississippi is going to have a voice in Jackson on a statewide level. That's how important this position is. So gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you, and thank you for running. We appreciate that.
You're welcome.
The rules are very simple. I'm going to introduce the candidates in a moment. They're each going to have 2 minutes to give an opening statement. After that, each question they'll have 3 minutes to answer the questions that have been submitted. I have one question I'll probably kick this forum off with. They'll know how much time they have because we have a monitor here. Pay attention to that monitor. I don't want to cut you off. I'll give you a little leeway along the way.
You've got 30 seconds.
But we'll see how it works. I have 25 seconds, by the way. We got a home team and a visiting team because we are in Hattiesburg. So we'll start with the visitor as we introduce the two candidates, first of all. Michael Watson, the Republican in this race, is a Pascagoula native. He graduated from Pascagoula High School and went on to earn a BBA and a JD Law degree from the University of Mississippi. He is a member of the Ole Miss Hall of Fame. While at Ole Miss, Michael served as a youth minister at a church in his mother's hometown of Noxapater. During the summer of 1999, he served as an intern for then U.S. Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott, where his desire to one day serve the people of Mississippi as an elected official was reignited. Michael Watson was first elected to the Mississippi Senate in 2007. He has served Jackson County for what is now a 12-year legislative career. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Watson.
Thank you, Brad.
Dr. Johnny Dupree entered public service in 1987 when he was appointed to the Hattiesburg Public School Board, where he served as secretary and then president. In 1991, he was elected to the Forest County Board of Supervisors, where he served 10 years before running for mayor of Hattiesburg in 2001. Johnny Dupree served as mayor of Hattiesburg from 2001 to 2017. He was the first African American to be elected as mayor, and his tenure was the longest of any other mayor in the city of Hattiesburg. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Johnny Dupree. Thank you. There were some drawings far before I got involved in this, apparently, and Mr. Dupree, you have the first opening statement. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Brad. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. He says this is the home team. I guess the referees are from the coast. So it's kind of fair, I guess it would be. Look, I thank William Carey for putting this on, and I thank those who are co-sponsors for doing this. And Michael, I thank you. I appreciate it. We've had a very peaceful campaign. We've had one that's been very respectful and talk about the issues, and I think that's what you all want. And that's what I think we're all known for, is doing those kinds of things. I first of all have to acknowledge my mother in the back because she did such a great job, I believe, of raising 3 kids on her own, and I appreciate her doing that. And then I have my family, my immediate family here with my 2 daughters, my 2 grandsons, people who love us and support us. And then love of my life is my wife, who allowed me to run. After 2 years being out of politics, I really had to persuade her to allow me to do this. But I want to be as frank and open as I can. The reason I got back into the race is because of the elections, because of election reform. We're a better state than having 30% or less of people coming out to vote. And we need to make sure that we do everything that we can to have the increase the access, increase the participation, and increase the voter confidence that we have in the election process. And unless we do that, we have something less than a democracy. And so what I want to make sure that we do, and there's a myriad of opportunities and duties that the Secretary of State has. Just like being mayor, you can't imagine the kind of duties that you have being a mayor. I liken it to the Secretary of State. But the one reason I came is to make sure that what we have here in Mississippi, what we have here in Hattiesburg and the Gulf Coast, is what we all love, and that is a democracy, a democratic republic. Thank you all very much for allowing us to come.
Michael Watson, you have 2 minutes.
Brad, thank you very much. And to the Federalist Society, thank y'all very much. The Gulf Coast Business Council, appreciate what you do and how you serve Mississippians as a whole. And obviously, William Carey, what a great mark for our state, a great place of education and freedom of speech and the great things that you do. So I appreciate what you stand for. And I think it is important that you know why we run for office. About 3 years ago, I sat down with Governor Bryant, and we were kind of having a conversation. He was in his last term, obviously, and I was coming up on what I thought would probably be my last term and be going home. And he asked the question, so Michael, what are you going to do next? And I said, well, Governor, you know, I really hadn't thought about it. I think I'm probably just going to go home. I've got a wife, and at the time I had 2 little girls, and now 3 little girls. My wife's at home, by the way. My little baby's probably still asleep. You know, Governor, I don't have to be here. This isn't what defines who I am. My relationship with God, my title as a husband, my title as a son, my title as a friend, my title as a brother, those are the things that define who I am. So I don't have to have this capital. It doesn't define me. He said, well, Michael, out of left field, have you ever thought about running for Secretary of State? And I said, no, sir, Governor, I haven't. Never crossed my mind. Never wanted to be Secretary of State, never thought about it. He said, well, listen, you're an attorney. You're a small business owner. You've been in the legislature for 3 terms now. You've dealt with election law and other issues under the umbrella of the office. I think you should consider it. I think you'd make a great Secretary of State. You know, it's one of those ideas where you kind of walk out and thought, man, that was a cool conversation. That was great. I'm not doing that. But as time goes on, you knew how these ideas kind of set in. They don't leave. And they continue to come up. And you continue to think about it. So I decided, you know what, I probably should pray about this because this won't leave. And so I did. I prayed about it, got a piece about it, and then more importantly, possibly, is the conversation with my wife. Lauren and I had a great conversation about it and said, Michael, this is something that you need to do. The Secretary of State's office is incredibly important to our state. As you heard earlier, it's a high-profile office. There are a lot of issues under that umbrella. So I believe it's important that we have a conservative in that office because making sure that Mississippi has conservative leadership is important. And we're going to explain why here shortly. So I appreciate you having me here. Johnny, thank you for, Doctor, thank you for running as well. It's great that you offer yourself for public service. So look forward to having a conversation.
God bless you.
The first question, 2 minutes in length, it goes to Michael Watson. I want the people to know a little more about you, but it's more about your party affiliation. Sure. You are a Republican. You mentioned conservative values. You're also somebody who supported Chris McDaniel. So Chris McDaniel's run a couple of times. He's run effective campaigns, but he doesn't have the love of all Republicans in the state of Mississippi. How do you get out of his shadow and run and bring all Republicans in?
Sure, I think it's important to understand why an individual supports any other candidate, and it goes back to conservative beliefs, conservative values. So if you look at Senator McDaniel's voting record in the state Senate, compare it to mine, we're both conservative members of the legislature. If you look at lifetime ratings, I'm actually probably a little bit more conservative than Senator McDaniel is on a consistent basis. So I think it's important to understand it's not a certain shadow. It's not necessarily supporting for the actions or activities that he does. It's a belief value. It's core values of why you're a conservative and why that's important to Mississippi. So if you take my record apart, it's something I don't just say I'm a conservative. I've got a record that proves it. There's a reason why the American Conservative Union said, look, we want to support Michael Watson in Mississippi. There's a reason why the NRA, there's a reason why Mississippi Right to Life. These conservative institutions that have really stood for conservative values over time have come in and said, look, Michael has the record. He doesn't just say it, he proves it. So it's not about who you supported in the past. I understand people want to ask that question, but at the end of the day, it's about what does that individual believe, how do they carry themselves, he or her, and whoever's offering themselves for public service, and what have they done with their voting record. I think that's what's important to voters in Mississippi. And not just that, but it's also about, do you have plans? What are the things that you see that are important in this office? And we talked about it earlier. I think it's important that people understand it's not just about elections. You got business services, your LLCs, your corporations, your nonprofits, that list continues to go on. You've got public lands. You've got big issues, titlings for the coast. 16th section land, which is a big issue here in Lamar and Forest County. Forfeited properties. These are big issues that impact the entire state. So having someone who's got the background, being an attorney,
being a small business owner, I've interacted with the Secretary of State's office in the private sector, in the public sector as a legislator, understanding how that office works. I think that's important. So again, it goes back to, sure, what does that individual believe? How have they carried themselves while they've been in office, and what are their plans for the office? Look, we've offered big solutions. The DMV, you've seen that story come across several times. I don't think you should run for public office if you're not prepared to tackle big issues. The Department of Motor Vehicles, as we've all seen, you've probably had issues yourselves in going to get your driver's license. CDLs, it's a commerce deal. That's a business, an economic development deal here in Mississippi that we've got to get right. So people say, Michael, look, that's a tough issue. It's a big one. I just don't know if you can handle that. Well, I don't think you should run for office if you don't want to tackle hard issues. So we've put our plan together, the SIP plan. It's on our website. We'll talk a little more about that later, I'm sure. But again, it goes back to, what does that individual believe? How has he or she carried himself? Look at their voting record, and then do they have plans for the office? And I think that's what's important.
Johnny, you're a Democrat. This is Mississippi. In your mind, why do you think this is the right time for you to run? And does a Democrat really have a chance to win a statewide office in this state?
Well, thanks for the question. I guess historically you would say a Democrat does not have an opportunity to win, except for the fact that a young man who's running for governor has won 4 times. So the opportunity does exist. The opportunity doesn't exist when you don't run. And so you have to continue being on the playing field, if you will, in order to have the opportunity to do that. You know, everything that I've ever done in my life, basically people have told me, you can't achieve, you can't do that. And I started working when I was real young, and they said you were too young to start until a young lady on the corner, Mobile Street, gave me a job. I married early, married when I was 19, wife was 17. They said, nah, that's not gonna last 6 months. Well, it's been 46 years and 6 months.
Amen.
Yeah, they said that you can't, school board, you don't have a diploma, you don't have an advanced degree, became president. They said you can't win supervisor, we did. You can't be the mayor, we did, longest serving mayor. So my entire life, people have said you can't achieve. Even when we ran for governor in 2011, Brad, they said that you can't win a Democratic primary. We did. And we didn't win the governorship because we weren't able to raise enough money in order to make that happen, which is something that I propose as campaign finance reform. I think that it's very difficult for Democrats in Mississippi to win simply because people don't believe Democrats can win. And therefore, it's most difficult to raise funds, and you need funds. So one of the things that I said in my opening that was the reason I'm in the race is for true voters reform, election reform. And so in order for us to have the level playing field, I think we need to have true campaign finance reform. We need to shorten the period of time that we actually have people to vote to campaign season. 9 months is entirely too long for a campaign to be going on. You'll understand what we mean if you ever run for statewide office or county office for that matter. But you know, you can elect a mayor or city councilman in 90 days. That's plenty of time. There are countries that only take 2 or 3 weeks to elect prime ministers and everybody else. I think that this is one way that we can do this. I think that it would increase people's attitude for voting, their interest in voting. You know, I think we wear people out. I know I get worn out over the commercials on television.
Except for mine.
Well, except for yours, Michael. I don't get worn out on mine because I don't have any, so. but you know, I mean, that's the whole process. I think that you gotta be in the game in order to play. And so I'm in the game, and I'm hoping that my being in the game will allow other people the opportunity to say, well, you know what? If that boy can be in there, I can too.
Let's take that the next step. True voter reform, campaign finance reform. One of the questions that's a student here at William Carey asked is, what is the main change you hope to bring to the office? And if elected, why is it so important to you? You started to talk about it.
Yeah.
Johnny, why don't you pick up on that?
Okay, I'll pick up on that. You know, under the Constitutional Convention, the framers were sitting there, and somebody asked a question. Are you going to be a monarchy, or are you going to be a republic? And Franklin answered and said, we're going to be a republic. And so what's the criteria of being a republic? Well, it's supported, a democratic republic is supported by the fact that people vote. If you don't have people voting, then you actually have a monarchy, where you only have a set of people determining for the entire people, for everybody. And that's what they came away from. And so that's why it's important to have true election reform, because when you look at the number of people, look, in Hattiesburg, the last 2 elections that we had, Brad, were less than 20%, or at 20%, one 9%, maybe one 21%. Well, so you had people who determined whether taxes were going to be raised, how much they're going to be raised, and you had 80% of the people in one instance and 90% of the people in other instances that didn't do it. And so we have to change that dynamic. We have to be inclusive and not exclusive. So that's why it's important, because we want to make sure that every eligible voter in Mississippi has the opportunity to go out and vote. And you can't do that if we have policies that don't promote. We have to have policies that promote openness, policies that this thing right here. You ask a young person about voting, first thing they tell you is, why can't you do it on this? You ask them about voting on registering online, and we tell them, well, you can't do that. If you register, you can re-register online, but you can't register online. That doesn't seem like what we ought to be doing. And so that's why it's important. If we want to increase voter participation, voter access, then we have to do those kinds of things.
Do you have a plan? You still have a minute left. That's why I'm jumping in. Do you have a plan to try to get voter registration online through?
Well, we're going to, that's the legislative, the legislature has to actually do that. But what we hope to be able to do is, when we're elected, is to get all the circuit clerks, municipal clerks, all the other officials, election officials and whatever, in one room, and let's talk about how do we have an open, things like open primaries. I mean, people say, why can't I vote? You have to determine, do I vote for the sheriff or do I vote for the Secretary of State? People shouldn't have to make that decision. You should be able to go and vote so that your vote is counted for everybody who's running for office. You need to be able to do that. Why do we vote on Tuesday? Well, we vote on Tuesday because we were an agrarian society. And in that agrarian society, you only had one day because you had the harvest, you had the planet, you had church, you had all these other things. You had one day to go vote. Many cities and states now are voting on Saturday. We need to be able to do that because we don't have one job anymore. We have many jobs.
Michael, let's throw that same question toward you. You could talk about voter reform if you'd like, campaign finance reform, or you go a different direction. What is the main change that you hope to bring to the Secretary of State's office, and why is that so important to you?
Sure, and to specifically address your question there, the biggest change that I proposed, and it's one that we mentioned just a few minutes ago, the DMV moving it over to the Secretary of State's office, and you asked the question why you proposed that. Well, again, if you're going to run for public service, you should be willing to tackle big issues. And right now we see our public having just a John Brown heck of a time trying to get their license. I went to an office in somewhere in Mississippi, I won't say where, but I snuck in the back door and was talking to folks there, and I was asking them, look, what did they tell you? What's your wait time here? How long do you have to wait? The average was 4 to 6 hours. And so I would say, well, ma'am or sir, surely there's something hard that you're here doing. We're just trying to renew our license. 4 to 6 hours to renew your license is ridiculous. Listen, I'm a conservative. I believe in small government. There are limited things that government should do, but when government is involved, like public service, like issuing licensing, issues like that, it should be good service to the citizens because they deserve that good service. So what we've said is, listen, it's a train wreck right now. It's a problem. So instead of just sitting there and watching it go by, let's address it. Let's try to tackle it. So what we've said is, look, it's the SIP plan, Service, Information, and Professionalism. You can look at it on our website, michaelwatson.ms. And so we want to propose several different things, but a streamlined internet service, basically just for driver's licenses. We've talked about doing things like privatizing the central printing of licenses. Right now, it's all over the place. So we would centralize that in Jackson, and then they would mail out to the certain places where you get your licenses. That saves money, but also is more secure. You talk about scheduling appointment times. The DMV is actually trying to do that now, and I think that's a great idea. But we would encourage that and promote that even more. We've talked about some kiosk issues where you make that more available to the public. We've talked about privatizing CDLs. Again, that's an economic development issue. If you look at your truck drivers right now, every day that they miss out of work is roughly $500 to them. That's important. You think that doesn't hurt a family? $500 a day? That's critical. And the reason why they can't do it is because government is standing in the way. That's unacceptable. That's why you step in and say, this is not going to happen anymore. It's going to stop, and we're going to do that. Now, what's important to note is it's not something the Secretary of State can do overnight. It's going to take legislative approval to move that over to the Secretary of State's office. I think that's where it comes into play, where it says, Michael, well, you know what? You've been in the legislature for 12 years. You have those relationships. That's a great thing to be able to walk across the street and say, guys, this is why this is important. This is why I think you should support this initiative. So we've met with KLLM and other truckers across the state. We've met with individuals that had these awful experiences. And so we've got a group together now where we're putting our plan into place, where we can make sure, look, the legislation is ready to be filed. Here, let's study it together. Let's move forward. So again, I think you take difficult issues, you drive solutions, and I think that's why you should be in public service, and the DMV to the Secretary of State's office is our biggest change.
Let's look at more of a philosophical question about this office. Sure. With such a broad range of responsibilities that the Secretary of State has that we heard just a few minutes ago, what are the main ways in which the Office of Secretary of State protects and serves Mississippians? And what would you do to make sure that that office continues to protect and serve?
Because it is
your first.
Such a large office, you could talk about a lot of things, but one that's on the tip of everybody's minds and tongues is, listen, election integrity. It's important. You know, men and women died to give us that right. So that's a heavy burden to walk into that office and say, look, I want free and clean and fair and secure elections. I think that's important. So that's a heavy burden to walk into that office with. I think that's important to make sure that we have good elections, because to get good public servants, you want clean and fair elections, again, that are secure, that folks can go to the polls and say, listen, you know what? I trust that my vote's going to be counted. And the vote that I cast is going to be counted, and it's going to matter, it's going to make a difference. We've seen races here in the last few years. You look at District 50 right now, it was a one-vote decision. Obviously, they're going to revote some of those boxes, but every vote counts. It matters. So that people can trust these elections, I think that's important. I think voter ID has returned so much trust, in my opinion, to the election system here in Mississippi. And Secretary Husband has done a fantastic job of implementing that. And I think it's important, being on the floor when that debate happened in the state Senate, understanding the intricacies of it, the reasons why we supported it and moved it forward in Mississippi, that we weren't sued by the federal government, the only state that it's been implemented flawlessly, in my opinion. Over 99.9% of people that come in have no problems whatsoever. You have 5 days to come back and show your ID if you forgot it. If you don't have an ID, we've issued over 7,000 IDs. So for people to say, well, we can't get an ID, that's not true. Very early on, we were offering rides to the circuit clerk's office to wherever to get your IDs. If you didn't have a birth certificate, we'd look it up for you. We made it absolutely perfectly clear. Listen, we want you to have an ID. We want you to participate in this system. So I think that's important.
I want to be Dave Elliott or Doug Walker to interject real quick. As Johnny Dupree mentioned, 20% of the people of this state who are registered are showing up to vote. So how do you get people more interested in the process as Secretary of State?
Sure, is that clock can go back up?
It's a continuation.
So I think even worse than that, if I remember correctly, the runoff election in 18, at the end of the year there, was roughly around 14%. That's embarrassing. So I think it's getting out and promote the vote is an incredible thing that the Secretary Husband has continued to drive home, getting to our young people and understanding, listen, here's why it's important for you to be engaged. You understand why this impacts your life going through to the rest of your life. Being able to vote, being able to have your voice, being able to have your say, electing folks that believe in the things that you believe in. And not only that, but holding them accountable in the next election, paying attention. I go to schools all the time and I ask them, how many of you watch the news, or how many of you do this or that? And far too often it's, I don't really care. That's a problem. But it's starting early on and getting to our youth and spending time with them and making sure they understand, listen, this is why it's important. People died for that right, for you to vote, for you to have a voice in what your country looks like moving forward, what your state looks like moving forward, what your cities look like moving forward. So making sure we encourage them to be engaged, and not just them, but us. The reason why people get to Jackson or to D.C. and then they go off the rails is because we forget and we don't pay attention to what they're doing. Accountability is key. It's not just getting folks elected, it's holding them accountable to what they said they were going to do.
Mayor, the same question. The Secretary of State's office has a broad range of responsibilities. What are the main ways in which you want to see the office protect and serve Mississippians?
Well, you know, Brad, as I've gone over this state, I think I told you we've put about 80,000 miles on my truck and since February 21st. We've talked to a lot of residents about a lot of things. What has not come up is that they have a concern about protecting them with securities or fraud, anything like that. They're not really concerned about that. When you go on the website and you can look and see all of the enforcements that they have put down for fraud, for securities, for all those kinds of things, they've already, and I think most people think they've done a pretty good job. Some of the things I would do, though, is to make sure that we get out into the public. The Secretary of State's officials get out during the election season. They go to all the different cities or counties. They selectively go to them because they don't have enough employees to do everybody. But they selectively go out to do that. I think that we should do the same thing as it relates to securities and the nonprofits because there's some people, you know, there's a lot of people out here don't know what Secretary of States do. To let them know what you do, information, education, what the Secretary of State's office does, the enforcement, what are the regulations. You know, some people that start a nonprofit don't know they have to be registered with the Secretary of State's office. So they're in violation already. And we don't want to show up with a hammer. We want to be a friend to start out with. Those are some of the things that I would do. I would, as far as elections are concerned, I would hopefully make sure that we would do some things that are kind of unique, like asking the young people, why don't you vote? Find out from them what's the reasons that they don't vote. I would look at moving the votes from Tuesday to another day. I would look at, you know, the data shows that in 2015, we had 33% of the people to come and vote. In 2016, it almost doubled. So it makes sense to me that if you want to increase the amount of people to participation, we just move our election to the even number of years instead of the odd number of years. For Forrest County, Mississippi, we did that. It would save us $500,000 this year that you could do some other things with. Those are some of the things that I would do. That's because, as mayor, we do tackle problems. Katrina, 2 tornadoes, floods. That's the duties of mayors. And so I think that as the public is concerned about making sure that there's no things going on with securities and nonprofits, that the Secretary's office, his staff, has done a pretty good job in doing that. But there's some other things that we could do in addition to what they're doing.
Mayor Dupree, this question goes to you, and it brought up earlier one of the responsibilities, 16th section land, public trust tidelands. Describe how you would carry out your responsibility with respect to those very important state land issues, and how, in the case of public trust tidelands, do you see those lease payments being used to benefit Mississippians?
Well, you know, again, total transparency. Like other secretaries of states who have been elected, they do absolutely nothing about tidelands. But they did a pretty good job. And so in the process of trying to learn as much as I could about things that the Secretary of State's office is responsible for, I found that statutorily the Secretary of State's office is responsible for management, leasing, collection, and then informing the people who are elected all of those interests, and then giving that to the legislature so that they can put the funds where they should go. Primarily, you know, that's that responsibility. Now you talking about spillways and those kinds of things. That's really the responsibility of the DMR, the Department of Marine Resources, and the governor. What I found out is that if there's another state body of water that determines or releases water like they did down on the coast, then it's up to DMR and the governor to actually make the federal government aware of what's going on so they can stop and do the things they need to do. But it's up to the Secretary of State to work internally with those two groups to make sure that everybody knows what they're doing. In terms of 16th section land, and I was on the school board. I was president of the school board. I'm also a realtor since 1988, real estate broker. I know what realtors do I think that teachers ought to teach and administrators ought to administer, not sell land, not be leasing land. It's taken away from their core duties they're supposed to do. Like other entities have done with the federal government and other places, they've enlisted the help of realtors to make sure that they market, they find out what the highest and best use is, take some of those land that are laying vacant and put them back where people can use them so that money would be benefited by the school district. As far as tax forfeited property, as a real estate broker and mayor of Hattiesburg, I've worked with the Secretary of State's office to actually sell properties and put them back on the tax roll. And I think most people think is that when that money comes back, it goes to the county, and it does. But what you don't understand, it not only benefits the county citizens, but it also benefits schools, libraries, bond issues that you pass, all those things that come from the money that the sale of that property, putting it back on the tax roll actually does. I think that we could use other entities like realtors and others who can actually help in that process, because there are hundreds, if not thousands, of those properties all over Mississippi. There's a program that Neighbor First, where those neighbors have the opportunity now to actually assume or require that land. I think that's what we ought to be doing, and make sure that those who are in the community would not only benefit financially, but they also can benefit by keeping their community where it needs to be.
Senator, you're as aware as anybody about how the Secretary of State has turned the tidelands into a legal fight on a couple of instances. How would you handle public trust tidelands? How would you handle a 16th section land?
Yeah, so both of those are obviously big issues for the entire state. Folks really understand 16th section land because that's mostly everywhere, obviously, but tidelands is an issue that is kind of, obviously tied to the coast there in a big way. And growing up and living on the coast, seeing that day to day and understanding the impact of tidelands, and not just that we want to protect our coastal resources, our natural resources, because Mississippi along the coast is just as beautiful as anywhere else you go. It's gorgeous, it's beautiful, our islands and the beach there. And there's a fine line to make sure we protect that, but also, it's an economic development issue as well. I think the key is applying the law fairly and justly, and being consistent, making sure that the law is there. So as an attorney, I don't make the law up. I don't interpret it different ways every other day. I follow the law as it is written and apply it fairly to each and every one that abides by that. So with tidelands, again, it's a fine line, making sure you understand, let's protect our natural resources when that money is appropriated by the legislature back to the coast for public access and other issues along the coast to make sure that the public has the benefit of the property. Again, that's an appropriation deal with the legislature. So the Secretary of State doesn't drive that. Now, granted, I can have a conversation and be public with that, and that's fine. But it's a big issue for the coast, and obviously one that was impacted by the Carey spillway. And Mississippi doesn't have a voice at the table. So I think it's incumbent upon all of us who are elected to be a bullhorn and say, listen, Mississippi needs a voice. You just impacted our entire coastline. You heard our fishermen, you heard our folks that enjoy the nature down there, the wildlife. That's an important issue, but one that we're going to make sure that we have a seat at the table as we move forward. And that's being loud, and it's getting in front of federal officials and others saying, hey, Mississippi deserves to have a voice in this. On 16th section land, again, the same thing. The law is law. You apply it justly, fairly, and consistently, and make sure people understand, listen, this is how the Secretary of State is going to apply the law. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're your best friend, or he doesn't know you from Adam or Eve. It's being consistent with that and understanding the law and applying the law, and I think that's important. Seeing it at the legislature, understanding how it works. Not just tidelands, not just 16th section land, but also forfeited properties. And one of the things that Johnny mentioned a few minutes ago is you don't hear a bunch of complaints about securities and others, and that's because Secretary Lisbon has done a great job with that and make sure the office is engaged in those issues. And the forfeited properties, one that I would encourage and one that we would look at more is, just like Johnny mentioned there, making sure that more individuals here in Mississippi are buying those properties. The Neighbors First initiative is a great one, but being engaged on a local level, because when you have property that at your neighboring lot or at your city lot here, it matters that you take care of it, that you keep it clean. You want that to turn over and folks to invest. So some of the issues there that we'll continue to talk about, but that's a general stance.
Another question from one of the students here at William Carey. What processes that the Secretary of State's office handles are out of date or not keeping up with modern technological advances and capabilities? And how would you work to change or streamline those processes to make sure that that office is up to date?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest ones to talk about there is online campaign finance reports in a searchable manner where folks could just go in and type a name and say who's given to this person or who's this person given to. And Secretary Husband, I remember a few years ago, it was a conversation we had about that. Now it's voluntary. You can go in and file yours online, but I think making that mandatory moving forward, that transparency is key. I think it's important that people understand, hey, who's supporting so-and-so and why did they support them and when did they give them, that donation and was it around an issue that they had an interest in and did that indicate, maybe some kind of unjust or untoward motive, who knows? But having that out there, having that sunshine effect, that being open and online, I think is important. So that's really the only one I can think of moving forward. Obviously, that's one that once you get into the office and you see some of the processes from the other side, understanding how they work, well, you know what? We could tweak that a little bit. We could tweak this a little bit. Online registration was mentioned earlier. One of the biggest issues with that is cybersecurity. We're seeing thousands of attacks per month on our systems here in Mississippi. So number one, let's make sure we have those secure before we move forward with anything else. The same thing goes with voting on a smartphone or anything else. Cybersecurity is an issue that's going to continue to grow, not just with election security, but across the entire state. And you think about the information that's contained on voter registration, and I don't want anybody to have access to that. So making sure that we have secure means to transmit that information and cybersecurity is number one in that issue. And again, I don't think that just applies to elections. It also applies to the entire state. So looking at that, and that's another initiative that we'll continue to grow with, and I've talked to Secretary Husband about it, obviously candidate for lieutenant governor. It's going to be a big piece that he pushes. So having that conversation in a more broad way is important. So not just to the Secretary of State's office, but technologically moving forward, what can you bring into the 21st century? That office in its entirety has been moved forward. So it's pieces that you see once you get into that office to make tweaks and changes that will move forward.
Is there enough funding available to make technology happen?
I think so. I think it's important that we have a lieutenant governor who understands the value and the importance of the office of Secretary of State. So hopefully Secretary Husband will be our next lieutenant governor. And I think he understands the job and the title and what comes with the office. So having someone that would be friendly upon that office is important to say, look, this is something that we want to move forward, that you did a great job in trailblazing, but we think we can make it a little bit better and we need your support. So I think that's another issue that we'll move forward with.
Mayor Dupree, the same question to you. What processes in the office are out of date that need technological advances and technological capabilities to better serve the people of Mississippi?
Okay. Well, first of all, I guess I have to invoke a privilege too, since Michael named Secretary Holden. I have to name Representative Jay Hughes running for lieutenant governor as well. So just for equal time purposes. And I'll tell you all out there how difficult it is to stay up here 3 minutes and answer a question when we travel 4 hours to North Mississippi and they give you a minute and a half. So we have 8 hours to get a minute and a half, and I got an hour, and we got half of an hour to do it. Michael said a lot. Okay, streamlining things in the Secretary of State's office. If you try to go online, if you go online and you're looking for one-stop shop, you find something that says Mississippi Boss. What is that? I have no idea what that is, but it's what you're looking for. I would first of all try to get a webmaster. My daughter said don't call it webmaster. Web designer, I'm sorry. Ladies, I apologize. A web designer who is well-versed on finding out how do people search for things. You know, in Mississippi, since our digital divide is so great, and most people have this. They don't have a computer. And so how do people search with this on the Secretary of State's webpage to find what you're looking for? It's very difficult to do. But somebody's out there has already decided how to do that. I think that education is always key to whatever we're trying to do. I think that getting out into the community and letting them know what the Secretary of State offers and what he can or she can do to help you in whatever you're trying to achieve. I think that's one thing that I think can streamline things. I have to move back to something that the senator said earlier about solving problems and the DMV. And the reason I'm doing that is because we had the same problem in Hattiesburg when I was mayor. And what we did was actually the city council, which I appreciate doing, I proposed something to them along with Lamar County Board of Supervisors that we actually opened up another DMV office. We had one on the south end, we put one on 98. That relieved some of the lines that we had down there. That's how we solve problems. Taking over another state office, I think is really not the way to do it. Let's fix the problem we have in the Secretary of State's office. And then, because, you know, I'm sure some of y'all probably want us to take over the State Highway Department and fix our roads. But that's not what we ought to be about. We ought to be fixing what we have right now and making that the best we can be. And then look over to the, I've had the joy of being the mayor of Hattiesburg for 16 years with almost 800 employees and almost a $200 million budget. I think I know how to answer a question. I think I know how to make sure that we do things to solve problems. And I've gone through Katrina, 2 tornadoes, a flood. I was out of my house for a whole year. Well, not me, my wife and I both were out of the house at the same time.
I've got
I'm
to cut you off.
I'm sorry. Okay.
I'm going to make an editorial comment here
okay.
because we've talked about the DMV a couple of times. It's only going to get worse, as we learned 2 days ago, because we all need a little star on our driver's license in the next 365 days.
Yeah.
So somebody better fix something quickly, because 4-hour lines are going to become 8-hour lines before you know it. That's my editorial comment. Let's get back to the forum. Because of the pervasive nature of the get-rich-quick investment schemes, Mayor, how important is the Securities Division and its work to protect Mississippians from potential scams and bad investments? And how will you work to protect people particularly vulnerable to these scams?
You know, our population is vulnerable. The educational level that we have, the income level that we have. I've not seen any pervasive fraud or anything, isolated cases. Again, I think the Secretary of State's professional staff has done a great job in making sure that we do everything that we can to make sure that we protect those who are most vulnerable. You know, those who are elderly, those who have the funds. I think that we do that. And again, we do that by getting out into the community. You know, we talk about universities and university towns. They have great sports figures. They have football, basketball, but they can't fill the stadium. But one reason they can't is because they don't get out into the community and tell people who they are, show people who they are, rub elbows with people. I think the Secretary of State needs to do that. When you look around and you talk to people about the Secretary of State, again, they don't know. Charities don't know that they have, nonprofits don't know, don't know that they have to register. There's also an enforcement arm that they don't know about. And I think they need to know that there's an enforcement arm that is associated with all those kinds of entities. And maybe if we get out and we look at the charities, the word to get out that if you don't do it right, we're going to come after you. So the word must be already out, because you're a newscaster, news director. I don't think you reported on that kind of thing, but maybe once this year. And I don't know that for a fact. But that's not something that's pervasive, I don't think, in Mississippi. What is pervasive and what we need to fix is election reform. I will tell you that when you have election reform, people who think like you, want the same things that you want, you elect them. We talked about the titlers on the coast. Well, when we started out with the process of allowing gaming on the coast, Well, our elected officials told us that money's going to schools. You know how much goes to the schools? Zero. Now, you talking about public accountability? When you vote and elected officials tell you or candidates tell you they're going to do something, when you vote, they darn well will. But when you don't, guess what they do? What they want to do. And they go back in and go back in and go back in. And as mayor, I'm going to tell you, you down on the ground. I had a guy tied a bulldog to our porch. He tied it to our porch because the animal control wouldn't come and pick it up. They came and picked it up from my house, though, but you know.
I think
I'm
we
sorry,
might be able
we
to get
moved
into a
into
debate
something.
here about how much money is going to education, but that's not what we're here for. Same question to you, Mr. Watson. Because of the pervasive nature of the get-rich-quick schemes, investment schemes, how important is the Securities Division to you to protect Mississippians from scams and bad investments? And what will you do to protect people who are vulnerable?
Yeah, I think it's important, obviously, to tip the hat to Secretary Husband and the job that he's done, making that a priority and understanding, there's a section of law out there that directs and guides that office, making sure that the brokers and others are understanding of what the law means and how it applies to them. Obviously, we've had Morgan Stanley and I think maybe the Lamar Adams case, a few others here of late. Not a ton that have been large, but I think a reason for that is because the Secretary of State's office has been so focused on issues like that. And I think it starts with awareness, making sure that people understand the law and what it means. Again, the brokers and people in the industry, and the regulation of that obviously falls under the Office of the Secretary of State. So it's spending time with them, making sure that they understand, hey, let's keep this clean. You understand the law, and we're going to come in here and drop the hammer if we have to. I think it's also educating the public, the general public, about the laws, as Johnny mentioned there. I think it's also talking to other states, seeing issues that are happening in Alabama or Louisiana or Colorado or New York or wherever, and what's happening in your states. And let's make sure that I understand we're prepared if that comes to Mississippi. It's being prepared, and it's also being reactive when you see these things, but proactive when you can because you've seen it in other states. So I think it's a big portion of when you go out to speak to Rotary clubs, when you go out to speak to Kiwanis clubs or Lions clubs, making sure they understand, hey, look, we're here to help. I'm a public servant. I work for you, and these are the things that I can do as a public servant. So make sure you're aware of the things that I can help with on the enforcement side. And here are these laws, and obviously in those clubs, you're going to have a lot of folks that are investing monies in the security industry. And again, making sure they understand we're here to help you, we're here to protect and to serve. A lot of things you can talk about in securities, it's a delicate, complex issue to understand. But making sure that people have that general awareness and a broad understanding of why we're here and how we can help is important. And that starts with awareness and education. Speaking of education, as my friend mentioned there has been a lot of money that has gone from gaming into the schools, especially on the coast, and you can testify to that. So I won't get off on that debate. We'll stick to securities for now. But again, it's spending time in the communities. It's making sure that, number one, that as Secretary of State, you understand the law first. You understand the regulations. You make sure that you can apply those fairly and justly again, and making sure that everybody understands, hey, we're not going to treat our friends any differently than anybody else. It's the law. We're going to enforce it consistently and strongly each and every chance that we get.
We have time for one more question before closing statements. It's a very simple question, and we start with Senator Watson. Why now? Why now when politicians are under so much scrutiny? When you have an opportunity to go home and be with your 3 kids and get back into the business world, why now run for Secretary of State?
Sure, I think that's a great question, and I'll start, I guess about 2 or 3 years ago. I was leaving one January morning, first day of session, and my oldest walked in. She said, "Daddy, you got to go." And I said, "Baby, yeah, I do. It's the first day of session." And so I wish she didn't have to go. And so, baby, you understand this. Either good people will do this or bad people will do this. And so you got to have good people that want to serve. And so I think it's important that we have men of integrity, men of high character, that want to serve the people of Mississippi. So when I sat down with Governor Bryant 3 years ago and we kind of talked through the issues, and I said, look, you're prepared. You've seen these issues. You understand them. You understand the law. You understand the duties of the office. And you're willing to serve. Again, I don't have to do this. This doesn't define me. My title doesn't define who I am. So I don't have to be elected. I don't have to be a senator. I don't have to be Secretary of State. I got 3 little girls at home. And I can go be a dad too and be fine. So I think it's making sure that people understand you run for office to serve. You run for office to do good, to make better Mississippi, to leave it better than you found it. So I think it's important that you think about your children and generations to come. And how do I leave Mississippi better so that I can go to rest and say, look, I did my best. So I think now is important. There's a lot of scrutiny. But I think if you understand what you believe and you're consistent in applying those principles, you stand up and you do what's right each and every time. I think it's important that we have people that are prepared to do that these days. And so why now? That's exactly the reason. We see a lot of bad things in the country these days. And we have people that are willing to serve that are, that they try to put God first and do the right thing each and every time. I think that's our only answer to make this country better. Mississippi's a great place. It's a beautiful place. I'm happy to be a resident. I'm happy to be born here. And so I've always tried to say, look, what can I do to make Mississippi better as we move forward? And public service has always been in my heart. My parents, my dad's a pastor. So I'm a preacher's kid, a good one. I wasn't a black sheep. So I actually enjoyed being a pastor's kid. And it's amazing how being a preacher's kid really kind of prepares you for politics. Lots of politics in church, if you didn't know.
Oh, yeah.
And everybody wants to watch a preacher kid mess up.
That's right.
I said, all eyes on you. So it's amazing how that kind of prepares you for these times. But again, just being willing to serve and do the right thing. Mississippians deserve good, fair, honest, high character leaders. And so I think traveling the state and visiting with so many just good people, and it doesn't matter where you go. Mississippi is so unique in the sense that I'm in Corinth or if I'm wherever, so-and-so, oh yeah, I knew your mom's Sunday school teacher's aunt or cousin. We all know each other. And so we all want what's best for each other. I believe Johnny agrees with that. It's just how we get there is the key. And so being a conservative and having that record and understanding moving forward, I think that's an important.
Mayor Dupree, you could ride off into the sunset with your wife, be with the kids.
Yeah.
You've had 4 terms as a mayor here. Why now? Why run for Secretary of State?
Well, Brad, we did ride off into the sunset. We bought an RV. We started going to Mobile and seeing our kids and opened up a trucking company. So we know about DMV and the driver's license, that issue that you have there. And the question is, why now? Why not now? I heard one of the Democratic candidates for president say, we are drinking out of a well that we didn't dig. I'm here because of people like Vernon Damer and Medgar Evers, and I could go on and on and on and on. I won't do that. You go to the History Museum and you can see that. So we rode off into the sunset, and then I started teaching at University of Southern Mississippi. And I was working with kids, intelligent kids, some of the best. And I found out quickly that they didn't know anything about civics and government. And I would ask them simple questions like, who's the mayor? And they didn't know. And I said, well, who is the former mayor? And they didn't know that either. I realized quickly that we're in trouble with our young people and we need to do some things about it. And so again, I got into my system and started looking at why not now? The word says you should leave an inheritance for your children's children. And so those people who dug that well left me an inheritance. They left me something that I can build on, which allowed me to build on that for my children and my grandchildren and hopefully their children. And that's something that we're losing. And I just couldn't sit at home and not do what I'm supposed to do in trying to make this a better world for people to live in. I think that's what we've done. I think those of us who have done well in life, although we may not have grown up the way we would have wanted to. I didn't have a dad. I had a mom who did a great job. But I had a church, and had a community who put something in me to say that you just cannot go home and just say, take my ball, I'm gone. And so I got into it, got back into it. And I appreciate my wife for allowing me to do that because she'd had enough of it, quite frankly. And I can understand why. But it's something I think that, there's another scripture, and people don't take Bibles to church anymore. I don't know if I can find it now. But the scripture, Ephesians 2:10, says, God has made us what we are. And in our union with Christ Jesus, he has created us for a life of good deeds, which he has already prepared for us to do. Now that's the Good News Bible, and I do that because anybody can understand that better than going to the other one. I think God has prepared both of us for what we're doing.
Offering.
Oh, okay. I will take it now. Campaign finance reform, y'all remember that now?
It was open.
It was open. But, again, I appreciate you all allowing us to come here, but that's why we're doing it now.
Gentlemen, thank you
sir.
for answering the questions. We're not done yet. Don't applaud yet. And thank you to the William Carey students for their provocative questions. Yeah. It made my job a lot easier. We have closing statements. We'll go in the reverse order from the opening statement. So Senator Watson, you have 2 minutes to address the people one more time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brad. And again, thank you for hosting this debate. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being engaged. This is how America works. It's when our citizens come out and they listen to the candidates. They learn what they stand for, what they believe, and then they go support them. But again, it doesn't stop there. It's accountability. Did Michael Watson do what he said he was going to do? And if he did, then you know what? I can vote for him again. But if he didn't, I hope you don't vote for me. And I hope you tell me, you know what you said, but you didn't do it. That's important.
Yeah.
That's when government goes off the rails, when we quit paying attention. So being engaged and listening to what politicians say and then watching what they do, that's what really matters. Look, Mississippi is a beautiful state. We have a lot of good things happening right now. So it's important that we continue conservative leadership that understands, you know what? You know what to do best with your money, not people in Jackson, not government. Businesses know what to do best with their money and how to invest it, not more regulations from a government that stands in the way, that causes red tape and more hurdles to jump through. We talked about the DMV earlier and making sure that our commercial drivers aren't sitting out of work every day and losing $500. You run for office to serve the people. You serve the people to do good. You do good by tackling big issues. I don't just run for office for the title. I don't need this. I don't have to be Secretary of State. I can go home and be a dad of 3 little girls and a husband. That's fine with me. But it matters to serve the people of Mississippi, again, to leave the state better than you found it. So again, I appreciate you being here. I pray that you will get out and vote on November 5th, Michael Watson for Secretary of State. I know my friend's going to ask you for your votes as well, but I appreciate Johnny and his willingness to serve again. That's important. This isn't easy. It's not easy to serve, to leave your family. So I appreciate men like Johnny who care enough to offer themselves to public service. So again, thank y'all for being here. I appreciate your consideration. If you have any more questions, we'll be around afterwards, but also you can look at our website at michaelwatson.ms, and I look forward to talking to you soon.
Mayor Dupree.
Okay. Thank you. I've got can I read a letter from a student? And,
Sure.
My name is Mallory Amon, and I'm one of the co-directors of Community and Governmental Relations at Mississippi State University. I'm one of the people in charge of voter registration as well as our trips to the Capitol and other governmental affairs. And I would love to meet with you to discuss your viewpoint on pushing for online voter registration for the state of Mississippi. Attempting to modernize the state of Mississippi with initiatives like online voter registration is something that the students at Mississippi State feel passionate about. And the lack of such initiatives is something we believe contributes greatly to the brain drain of our state. The ability to register to vote online would not only provide easier access to voting, but also help the state save funds. Just last week, we registered 324 new voters, and we believe that we could easily register more than double that number if they could register online. This is from a student. This is from somebody who we're talking about don't vote at the same level. We said, why don't students vote? This one is telling you why, at least at Mississippi State. I have 2 grandsons down there, Chandler and Chesney. And when you give them something that new that they haven't eaten before, I don't know where they got this from, but they smell it. And if you can talk them into eating it, they actually about 90% of the time like it. I'm trying to make sure that things that our legislators don't like because they hadn't done it, smell it. And you might like it. Because this is what you say, you ask, why don't they do this? You got students telling you why. And she raised for 324 kids and could double that with something simple like letting them register online because they don't have a way. Some of them don't have transportation. And then let's put precincts on those campuses so they don't have to get away to go vote. If you want to increase participation, let's do things that mirror what we say. God bless you.
A reminder that voter registration for the November election is until Saturday at 12 o'clock, so encourage people who are not registered in our Mississippians to go to their circuit clerk's offices and register to vote for this election. Gentlemen, thank you so much for participating today and for running for Secretary of State. Thank you to William Carey University. Thank you to the Federalist Society, the Gulf Coast Business Council. Personal privilege, I am a news director, as Johnny mentioned. If you live on the coast, we encourage you to watch WLOX starting at 9 o'clock on November 5th for all the election results. And since we're streaming on WDAM, our sister station, through Gray Television, if you live here in the Hattiesburg area, we also encourage you to watch WDAM on November 5th. Good luck to both of you. Please get out and vote and bring a couple people along with you to vote as well on November 5th. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you out in the lobby area.